Hi, and welcome to another episode of Wine and Wisdom. I'm Thomas Hoang, and you're listening to the TL podcast, where knowledge is shared and no one takes themselves too seriously.
How's it going? We're going now.
Going? Okay.
Fuck, it's cold. Why am I cold?
Yeah, I know.
We are
I'm alive
live.
now. I'm gonna put the heater on. I'm dying.
It's not that cold, surely, guys. Surely.
Listen, you're still on pain meds, Lou. You can't feel it.
No, I haven't had pain
Oh,
meds
come
for
on.
2 weeks. 2 weeks.
Yeah, it's cold today, yeah? Whoa.
It's crazy. Crazy.
All right, I get to put my heater on that my best mate charged me $1,000 to install, so that's good.
Are you best mate?
Yeah.
Good mate.
You
Yeah,
could give him a plug. At least give him a plug, Cam, while you're live.
Over the years, I've learned to avoid Cam's friends.
One is rip-off merchants installed.
Dead to me. Dead to me.
Did you?
How you doing, everyone? Beautiful people.
Mate.
Very, very good.
All right.
Happy.
Today's a special day, especially with our wine, because we are back into our competition first day. So let's start with you, Cam.
I sent you a message, Hoang. Did you going to answer it before I carry
I did not see your message. Doesn't matter. I'm not going to answer it. Why?
on a spot?
Why, Cam?
Well, my wine. Well, hang on. We're doing a competition now. Skinny over there in the bottom left to me is going the early crow, but I got some information this morning that Tweedledee and Tweedledum didn't put their wines in, so that would be an automatic disqualification. Yes? No. And now TL's responded to my message. Chris, you got thrown under the bus this morning. I just wanted to tell you. Lou, did you put your wine in?
No, I didn't. I'll own it. I didn't.
Competition's over. We lose. We're done.
But Chris and Lou were late. Wine should have been in on Wednesday by Wednesday afternoon. So
Chris is gone.
Chris is gone with his wine as well.
Yeah. Come on the early. I'm like, geez, when you were carrying on off air about it, I thought, geez, he's confident for a bloke who hasn't even put it in because of the information I got.
Well, they forget the rules, and the rules are very simple. You know, we can't have poor Charlotte working and running around trying to do the whole lot on same day.
Oh, we're running around, please. The text phone message puts on a computer.
Oh.
Oh,
Chris has
God.
bought a-
You know the funny thing? I bought that bottle of wine 2 weeks ago.
No.
So Chris has bought a 4.26 and it's not going to count for shit. Unlucky, brother. So I'm very glad I didn't put much effort.
What are you drinking, Cam? What are you drinking?
I'm very glad I didn't put much effort into it because I ran out of time. Mine's a...
We have Katrina. How you doing?
Hello.
Hi.
We're going to need some grief
Katrina.
here. First thing here. Chris is going to need a bit of help.
I'm already
Chris
feeling
is
the
gonna
drink,
need-
mate. You beat me in the wine. I forgot to put my
Help
bloody
in a
wine
second.
in. Right.
So it's a Petaluma Chardonnay from a Piccadilly Valley. Really, I think it was only a 4.1 on Vivino. So should be nice, but yeah, not one of my best. So,
Great drop.
but better than Chris's and Lou's.
All right.
It won't be better, but you'll still beat me because I'm disqualified.
What about you, Lou?
Beat
Which
Oh,
one did you have?
I'm not even going to show mine if I can get. I not
Cask
only
wine doesn't count, Lou. You
shit.
can't have wine in a box.
not only did I forget, I had to fall back on whatever was in my cabinet, which was probably a gift from a client. So I'm just going to show it and then I'm going to put it to the side.
It's a-
it's
What about-
it's called Fistful. I don't even know where it's from, but
Come on, at least from your clients, you should have spent a bit
Okay.
of time.
it's called Fistful. It's a 2019 Shiraz.
Okay.
I don't even know where it's from, but it's an Australian wine. I know that much. So that's it. But it doesn't count anyway.
What about you, Chris? The
I feel like putting the cork back in this wine and going to get another one. because this bottle of wine's a bloody good bottle of wine.
God, you were carrying on. I wish we had recorded.
Because I actually forgot that rule, right? So I got a 2021 Struy from the Barossa.
Yeah. Actually, we've had it before, but we had the 2019.
I checked, and we've had the 2018. So
Yeah.
I'm shattered.
It scores 4.3 on Vivino.
Oh gosh, Chris.
Yeah.
It looks like you've already had a glass, by the way. You've already had a glass.
How much was it, Chris?
$50, $49 or something.
Oh, well, that's a bargain then.
And I got a Celeste Crianza, Spanish wine. The grape is Tempranillo, and it's probably Spain. We do forget that it's actually the second largest consumer of wine.
Wow.
And Tempranillo is makes up about 85% of its wine from Spain itself. So it should be very bold, something you have with meat, something to probably down your sorrow if you're really depressed and sad. So maybe something that we'll need today. All right.
What did it rate? What did it rate? What did it rate?
Cam and I actually do equal 4.1.
Oh my God! That makes it worse.
Oh, Chris.
So even though we would have lost to Chris today, Cam and I have won the battle, and both Chris and Lou have lost. All right. Hi, Katrina. I know. Listen, this is Katrina King team. Just say hello to Katrina.
Hi, Katrina.
I'm sorry, Katrina. It's not an introduction that you deserve. However, it's something that is a bit of a ceremony that we have as a custom as we start the podcast. Team, just to introduce you a little bit to Katrina. Katrina actually lives in New Zealand.
Wow.
And Katrina works as a manager at the Grief Center in organization. And I think she joined the organization in 2003.
You're on mute.
You're on mute.
Turn your microphone on. We'll mute Chris and you turn yours on. Everyone's happy.
No.
While she's working that out, geez, I'm having a drink of wine.
All right. Roll your star.
Down the bottom, Katrina, there's a little microphone. If you
the red microphone, just click on it.
Cheers.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers. Are you on a laptop or are you on? Yep, you're on a laptop. So if your screen's disappeared, just scroll your mouse to the bottom so your bottom bar toggles up, and then you'll be able to see the microphone. And now unclick it.
Click on the arrow next to it and you'll be able to test the volume of it, or turn your speakers up, one of the two.
Yeah, maybe your speakers are down as well.
While we're waiting for you, so let's have a look. What is the topic of the week, Louisa?
So, the topic this week, what we are doing is we are going to discuss grief and mourning, which I think is a big topic. Chris seems very impressed by it. Oh, how good the wine is. How good the wine is, Chris. Are you on mute now? Are you? Say something, Chris.
Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah. I thought you were on mute, but you obviously...
No.
You're obviously speechless at how nice your wine was. So
I just can't believe
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yay.
Oh, here we go. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
Hey,
technology, technology.
It always happens when you're live too. Like
always.
Anyway, welcome to Wine and Wisdom.
Thank you. Kia ora. It's great to be here.
Now that you're here, why don't you just introduce yourself?
Sure, I can. So I am the General Manager of Grief Centre we're an Australasian charitable trust that supports all people living through loss. We started around 2009 here in New Zealand, and we've been working with funeral homes in Australia since about 2019. I have been with the organisation since the beginning of this year. I'm not a counsellor, but obviously work alongside a brilliant team and have learnt an awful lot from them on loss and grief. And I think our organisation, one thing we're really passionate about is improving people's what we term grief literacy. So people feeling comfortable about how to support people in grief, people knowing what's okay in grief, and then as a society we can support each other to get through what really everybody encounters. Literally every single person will encounter loss and grief in their life. So the more we can do to give people tools and skills and the ability to work through it, the better. So yeah, that's us and that's me.
Amazing.
Right. And so poor Katrina has agreed to come up and try and discuss with us. She doesn't realize that we're not a very serious bunch. However, we also would like to talk about this topic because it's a topic that everybody will go through at some stage in life, and it's almost a taboo subject sometimes. You know, we don't talk about it until we're there, and quite often when we're there, we're in the dark. We can hold on. How am I feeling? Is this normal? Is this not normal? Why is it that people whom I love want to offer help, and all I want to do is to go and hide in a hole and stay there? So is it because I'm illiterate when it comes to that field? Or so can you just tell us a little bit at the Grief Center? So what do you guys really do specifically when it comes to helping people with grief and mourning? So someone calls, someone does help.
Right. Yeah, so specifically as an organisation, we firstly offer grief counselling. So we have a team of qualified counsellors who, if somebody calls directly into the organisation, we can offer them counselling. We work with funeral homes directly to provide after funeral grief care. So that's where we have grief companions. We'll send some resources, and then grief companions will call people and just check in on their well-being, see how they're going. You know, and a lot of people are like, I'm good, you know, thanks for the call. But you'll get about 20% of people say, actually, I do want to talk. It's about 6 weeks after the funeral, and I don't want to burden people with my grief. I don't want to, you know, everyone thinks I should have moved on, and I don't feel like I have. So that's where our grief companions can step in and be that safe space and that listening ear for people. We also have resources that we provide to people. Here in New Zealand, we do groups, which people often find to be quite therapeutic, to be in a space with others with lived experience of grief. Even if the grief is different, it's just a great environment to be in. And then we also have a training and professional development arm. So that is working and training people who support those living through loss. So clinicians, nurses, aged care workers, social workers, teachers, you name it. It's that professional side of things. So we're quite a large organisation, you know, across all of that.
Amazing. Sounds like a great organisation.
Thank you. Yeah, we're pretty proud of what we do.
You should be. Yeah.
So if I just ask you, so if someone says, so yeah, I'd like to talk about to someone, do they go to a program and talk about it? Or is it just a conversation that you have with them for whatever time they need there and then that's it?
Yeah, the grief companions is really a conversation. And if the grief companion feels that the person is working with more complex or complicated grief, then they might go on to a more formal counselling, which is where you are really thrashing through your issues. And I mean, we all know grief and loss can trigger many things from life. It's often a compounded thing. So that's available to people as well. Yeah, it just depends on what support people need, because, you know, to your point, what you were saying, everyone is different in their grief journey. You know, it is as individual as your thumbprint, and how you think you might react is not necessarily how you will react or feel.
No.
So, yeah.
You just said something very important. Even how you think that you yourself will react. You do things that you go, hold on, I can't believe what I've just done, you know. And
yes, absolutely. And there's sometimes I think an expectation that I should be at this stage. You know, it's been 2-3 months after the death, and I still feel this, but shouldn't I feel better? You know, shouldn't I have moved forward. And the reality is no. I mean, because who says you should? It's your journey. It's your grief. It's your death. No one else had that relationship with that person or thing or whatever it is that you've lost. So I think one of the biggest things is, not to judge yourself and to say it's okay how I'm feeling. It's okay.
Probably not to judge yourself or others, because something that I experienced in my family with our most recent loss being my nan, some people were unable to get out of bed. Some people could function quite normally. Some people went to anger. Some people went to disbelief, and so everybody was doing it differently and trying to understand it and process it differently. And then I think that's when you see families sort of turn on each other a little bit, because it's like, why aren't you? How can you function and I can't get out of bed? How? And why are you so angry? This is a time when there should be solidarity, but you know what I mean? So I think
absolutely
exactly. Yeah.
Is there, in what Louise just said, is there a step or is there an order of things? Do you have to go through being numb first before you go through anger or whatever?
No, well, it's funny. So you're sort of referring to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She had her 5 stages of grief, which were denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance. And that was back in the 60s. She actually did that research when she was working with terminally ill people. It actually wasn't working with the bereaved. So it was one of the first models of bereavement. But new thinking is sort of saying, well, whilst those stages sort of exist, grief isn't a process. Grief isn't linear. So 5 stages isn't really considered to be a valid model now. And it's more accepted that people's journey is very unique, and they might flip back and forth through those stages, but it's not a process, it's not linear. So, and it's quite normal. So what you're kind of saying is that people are going to be at different stages at different times, which, depending on who they are and how they're dealing with that grief. So we don't like to talk about grief as a process. We talk about it as a journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Can I ask Katrina, is there a possibility that people build up for want of a better word, a tolerance to grief? So for example, if they've lost a loved one and within a couple of years after they lose another loved one, or are they just better equipped emotionally to handle that second loss?
Well, that's, I guess, kind of cumulative grief. And I guess for some people that actually makes it worse because you've got loss on top of loss. For others, absolutely. If their journey through their grief has been relatively healthy, it's not too complex, there's not too many triggers or complexities within it, then absolutely, I guess you do understand more what death means, what losing somebody means, and that can equip you to better handle future losses. Absolutely.
In your experience, obviously sometimes death is something that is coming if somebody is terminally ill, but a lot of the time it's so sudden and unexpected. And do you find that in those circumstances the grief is different, or do you find that people still grieve somewhat the same way, if depending on
look, again, it is different, but it's the same because it just depends on the person. And people often do think, oh, look, when it was somebody you knew they were 90 and they were, dying for a while, then it's not, it's not going to be a major thing. But for somebody, perhaps that person was their whole world. They had a really special connection. There was other things, in terms of their relationship, then it is still a major. So absolutely, traumatic death and really sudden death is of course going to be hard, but it doesn't mean that your other deaths and of older relatives and things are going to be just as hard.
And you're pretty silent about this because you're immune to this, man.
Not immune. I'm sitting here with a little bit of imposter syndrome because I haven't. Well, obviously, we know what you've been through recently, TL, and Chris last year, and obviously Lou, your nan, and I. Blessed in that I haven't had anyone from my immediate family pass. Not for 20 years, right? So, but I sort of come into this from the outside looking in, where 4 weeks ago I had a week where there was 7 people around me who had lost immediate loved ones, all in the same whatnot, and I've actually got a funeral tomorrow for another mate whose dad died 2 days ago out of the blue. And I struggled because everyone handled it so differently. And you can't judge and you can't even give advice, and it is a taboo subject. And normally I'm the worst mate in the world when it comes to stuff like that, because I hide from it myself. But yeah, the last month has been tough, but it's also been an interesting study because a couple of people from similar generations, a couple of the guys who were really battling with, two of my closest confidants, and that was a struggle where I'm usually going to them for advice, and to see them battling so hard. And at that sort of one step out of the immediate circle, it took quite an energy, it took quite an emotional toll even on that. But you can't complain, you can't. What do you do? These guys have just lost a father, a mother, a brother, a sister, and here's you daring to feel a little bit stuffed yourself, So it's been. I sort of come into it with that, and I sit here silent because I don't purport to know what it feels like, and I wouldn't dare comment on how, as we already touched on, should or would feel. And
yeah, you say that, but I mean, the reality is what you've been doing is supporting someone through grief, and even if it's felt like you're on the outside, I mean, that's a really important role. And it's interesting you say that you almost wanted to just bury your head and not pretend it sort of wasn't happening, and you weren't needed to be supportive, and that's such a common reaction. People
normally that was it, Katrina. Like in the past, that's what I've done. I've been a horrible mate through some people. I through some really bad experiences for people because fear of what are you going to say to these people. But this time I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that this time. So I have. But it's
uncomfortable.
Just the emotional toll, and it was one after the other, and but you can't. You're supposed to be their energy, right? That's what we're here for. And I found it very.
I guess you're kind of supposed to be just there for them, giving them space, letting them know that you are there for them. That empathy versus sympathy thing. It's one thing to say, "Oh, that's terrible, I'm so sorry," but it's another to really say, "Look, I'm so sorry, and I really don't know what to say, or I don't know what to do, but I'm here for you, and if you need me, I'm here." And giving someone that space and walking alongside them. So, I mean, that's what you're there to do as a support person. So, and good on you for not avoiding it, because it's such a common thing, and the grieving often talk about it, people taking a different aisle in the supermarket, because there's a real fear that if we talk to somebody and see them and say, how are you feeling, we don't want to mention the person who's died because we don't want to upset them, but actually it's okay to talk about the person who's died. They still existed, they were still a person, they're still part of that person's life. It's just that they're not physically there anymore. So I think sometimes asking for permission to say, look, is it okay if we still talk about dad or mum or whatever? And if they do, then sharing those memories and talking about that person is often quite healthy in the grief process, or grief journey, I should say, not process.
Something I have found though, in reflection, I've taken as an interesting social study, and some of the people the group that I'm talking about, they're all different generations, and the people who took it the hardest surprised me because they were the older generation. I've had a mate who's 34, lose his dad like that, and I've had a guy who's 40 and a couple of guys in their 60s or close to their 60s, and it was really the older generation who seemed to take it very differently to the others. And when you're trying to, there is no playbook for it, right? So you think if you've helped one mate through something, you could help them all, but you really got no idea. So sometimes sitting there and doing nothing is because you don't know where to turn next. Do you find that, I mean, with the Grief Centre, I assume you're dealing mostly with people who are dealing with it immediately, but is there the next circle out who sometimes you'll get a call from and say, look, I don't know how to help you, or I don't know what to do? Or
yeah, a little bit. I mean, they may call probably more on our resources than necessarily come for, to us for more professional advice. But it's a really good point you make, you know, and that's, I guess, comes down to that grief literacy. The more we can do to help to teach people how to support the grieving, that, you know, the easier what you're doing is going to be.
One other thing though is that sometimes it is important for people who do this report to understand that if they are there and they are available, it's more important than they have to feel like they have to do something.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Walking alongside is really, you know, what you're there to do. Although that said too, we've got, there's a fabulous woman here in New Zealand, Dr. Lucy Hoang. She's written a great book called Resilient Grieving. Highly recommend it. And she tragically lost her daughter in a car crash when she was 12, back in 2014, I think it was. And she talks about after the death of her daughter, what people would message and, you know, obviously say, I'm so sorry, but, you know, let me know if I can do anything. And the reality is, she said, I didn't have the energy to let people know what I needed. I needed people to just turn up with meals, to come and put out the rubbish bins on a Tuesday night, to think, you know, what do they need right now, and just to step in and do it. So that's part of support as well, as just thinking, what does that person need, and I'm just going to do that for them.
Yeah, absolutely.
What is her surname? Lucy
Hoang, Hone. She's done some great work in resilient grieving, which is really about giving people hope and belief that they can move forward and that life will get better, and that they can take charge of that. When she said when her daughter died, there was a lot of, oh, your life is your next 5 years, you've got to write it off, you'll be lucky if your marriage survives. It was all quite doom and gloom, and she was a resilient researcher, and so she looked at that and thought, well, actually, you know, I've still got 2 other teenage sons, I've got a husband, I've got a life, and I kind of want to fight for that. And so hence she turned to this looking at the resilience that we can be in grief. She's got a great TED talk if you wanted to look that up as well. But it's sort of a new thinking around grief, that we can take charge a little bit ourselves, and to help us move forward.
I think you quite often see, like, when something tragic happens, that it's the thing that gets people going and goes, like, and they obviously have that, okay, well, I'm not going to take my life for granted anymore because this has happened and it's so sudden, or it's so soul destroying. But then there's the other people that can't move on from it. Like, there's people that are stuck in grief for years and years and years, and the effects that it has on the body just blows my mind, in terms of people age 10 years in 1 year. You know, like, the broken heart syndrome is a real thing, real thing. And then, you know, from what they say in the very small bit of research that I did, that our body actually stays, as long, you know, our body actually stays in the fight or flight mode for as long as, you know, sometimes it can last for years, and the impact on our body on that is just so huge. But yeah, it's interesting because you see some people, they use that as something to say, well, I'm not going to take my life for granted anymore, or it's the complete opposite.
Yes, absolutely. And just talking on the physical side, I think, people are often surprised how the physical impact of grief, you know, it can be really significant in terms of whole body and just inability to sleep, you know, not wanting to eat, just, it really catches some people by surprise how much it can impact you.
True story on the physical side. When my mum passed, I actually got really bad sciatica, and I went to the physiotherapist, chiropractor, and he actually asked me, he goes, what's happened in your life? Oh, nothing. I mean, and I thought he was meaning accident, I fell over, or whatever. He goes, no, something major has happened in your life. I said, oh, no, nothing. He goes, and again, he pushed. I said, oh, my mum passed away. He goes, that's why you've got this. He goes, that's a symptom of huge amounts of grief, and your body's reacting to that, and so forth. And I was absolutely blown away. And it was within days of it happening that it come about. So body reacts in mysterious ways.
I thought you were about to blame that for your weight, mate, and I was going to call.
Sorry, Slim. Let me keep talking. So the other thing, Lou, that you said is about the people who don't let grief go. Do they hold that because they believe that's the last feeling or that they've had for that person? Is that the last memory or feeling? They think grief is what they need to hold to remember the person they've lost?
Yeah, you kind of, you're right on it with that. And that, I mean, the reality is you never move, your grief never goes. Once you've had a loss or grief, it will always sit with you. And one of our counsellors said to me once, what he tries to say to people who just can't move forward, that their grief is, all consuming and they can't move forward, is to sort of metaphorically pick it up and maybe put it under your arm and hold it somewhere safe. So you've still got your grief with you, but it's not in your way of moving forward with your life. And to think about it in that way is certainly a way. But yeah, you're right in that some people think, well, if I stop feeling sad, then I've kind of forgotten that person and they were no longer important in my life. But so yeah, Lucy Hoang talks about continuing bonds, which essentially is a more positive way of hanging on to that person, that you still, she still uses her daughter's Barbie towel that she used to dry her hair with after swimming, and, she still bakes her favorite cookies on her birthday. So it's allowing that person to still be present in your life in a positive way, and therefore not having grief as the tangible thing that you think you need to still have. It's giving yourself permission to be happy again, to say that I can carry on living, but it didn't mean that person wasn't important or still isn't important in my life. It's just that grief doesn't have to define that.
I think just on that alone, thinking back, I struggled particularly within the first 3 months of losing Nan, which was 2 years ago this month.
Yeah,
I found that I'd catch myself laughing at something, and then I'd think, how dare I laugh about that? Like, I've just lost my Nan. And that was something that I really struggled with, because I'm usually laughing all the time and joking around. And every time I did that, I would catch myself feeling so bad, because I was like, how dare I? But I see it with some other people that they are just never the same again. And I think none of us are the same again. It's like a physical scar that changes your body. It's never going to be the same. Yep. But I find some people just can't move beyond that point. It's whether it's a long stint of the depression stage or whatever it is, I don't know, but it's so sad to see.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're right. And again, everyone will be very individual with how they do move forward. I know Nora McKerney, she's an American author and podcaster. She's great. She's got a couple of great podcasts out if you look them up, but she talks about that grief is like you've been touched by something chronic, and it's not fatal, but sometimes it feels like it could be. But then she talks about that moving forward. You don't move on, but you move forward. So that's a nice way to look at it, I think, because it's hard to, again, like trying to deal with the not, like, you're allowed to laugh again, you're allowed to be happy again. And you sort of, what brought me around was thinking, what would my Nan want? What would my Nan want me to do? And that once I sort of took grasp of that idea and that thought, I was able to move on from it. But that's the hard thing, I think, is, just you see people stuck. I see a lot of people get stuck there, you know.
Well, whenever we lose someone, the person we lose will always want us to be happy, right? And we all know that. There's no question. We all know that. Unless they're miserable misers or whatever it is, everyone that we lose, they're going to want us to be happy. But at that point in time in grief, it's going to be very, very hard, to pull up your socks and put a smiley face on, right? There's no question of that. What I wanted to ask, and it's probably to all of you, because I don't know, because initially we spoke about having this podcast titled Grief and Mourning. Is there a difference, or is it a different stage, or is one internal, one external? What's your thoughts on grief, the difference between grief and mourning?
Well, I think mourning is the external. I think mourning is the external expression of grief, and we talk about collective mourning as obviously the funeral or whatever ceremony you might do around the person who's died. That's my definition of it, is that it's the external expression of grief is mourning.
I like that. That's a very good definition, Katrina. The funeral is the collective mourning of the person. That's amazing. Yeah.
And do you find? I totally agree. I think exactly that. Like, I understand that the grief is something that is an internal thing, our feelings, our emotions, our thoughts, and our processing, and then mourning is the outward display that we show to the world and the public display of what we're going through. And I think that's the difference between the two. Do you find that regardless of the time frame that's gone since someone's passed, do you think like holiday seasons, and we've got one coming up, do you think that like amplifies grief a lot, like forever? Like, because that's
absolutely. It's always going to be a trigger. I mean, and it doesn't always have to be a trigger that makes you cry. It's sometimes you get to a point that it's just a trigger that makes you think of that person. You know, I had a really close uncle who died about 6 years ago, and he was an avid musician, and he used to play jazz piano. And my 16-year-old now is a really great jazz pianist. And when he plays, I sometimes think, oh, it would have been, I wish Uncle Martin had been here to see this, you know. And it makes me, yes, a little sad, but it doesn't make me cry as it would have, you know, only a few months after he died. So yeah.
Is there, so again, speaking from an outsider's point of view, we've done a lot of work here previously on the podcast in relation to the Stoics, right? And their philosophy on death is that the longer you prolong dealing with the feelings, the longer you're going to suffer the grief or the intense pain. So their thing is, you know, lock yourself in a room for as soon as you can, for as long as you can, to deal with all the you know, emotions that you might not have dealt with, and the pain that you might not have dealt with, and the issues that you might have had with the person who died and all that stuff. To not get over it quicker, but to be able to move into a more positive direction quicker. Like, we've done a lot of talk about it's everyone, it's their own pace, and it's a journey, and walk beside and walk along. But is there any clinical evidence or any advice that you do give people where, hey, don't pretend like nothing's happened is one extreme, but instead of being busy, take a week off, sit in a room, cry your heart out, deal with it, and then life will return for you faster? Is that a real thing, or is that?
I mean, it is, in the sense it's very similar to the Māori tangi over here in New Zealand, where they, you know, the custom is that the deceased is brought back to the home, marae, and, you know, the family do gather for 3 days and do talk and cry and tell the deceased, you know, exactly what they thought of them, and there's this real conversation around it. So absolutely, it does help that journey. It doesn't mean necessarily at the end of those 3 days you're ready to go back to life and you know, as almost like it's never happened. But certainly with any friends and family, to it's very cathartic and very therapeutic to talk about the person. Even after my uncle died, I was with him when he died in hospice, and the close family were there, and we spent 3 hours with his body just talking about memories and life. And I just look back on that now and treasure that, and just think how neat it was that we got to be with him in that space.
You find that Western culture, well, actually, let me reverse that question. You mentioned the New Zealand,
the Māori tangi,
the Māori tangi, and it seems like tribal civilizations and even Eastern civilizations do death so much better than Western civilization. If I could, I know that's a horrible term, but
no, you're right. I mean, New Zealand
society is based around get up, move on, toughen up, don't talk about it, go to hell, and then we just suck at it, essentially, which is why, you know, some of the effects can last forever and ever. And obviously the person you've lost never leaves. We get that, but the indigenous cultures seem to do it so much better than we do. I don't know.
They do, absolutely. I mean, we're terrible at New Zealanders and Australians are really, you know, I think we're probably among the most grief illiterate in the world sometimes, and that we are just very much let's not talk about it. And even myself being in this space, you know, a friend recently, she was upset, and I asked her, you know, what was wrong, and she'd said that her mother had died. And even I almost froze in a moment of, I'm not quite sure what to say, you know, and I keep going, I need to message her and say, hey, are you okay? But it's just we're kind of busy, and you're right, we just don't, we don't deal with it as well as other cultures do. Yeah, I would agree with you on that.
So wouldn't that make sense that maybe the grief center should start doing its work at school?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, if we can teach our children tools and the ability to support people through loss and grief, because the reality is, we were reflecting the other day that, you know, the teenage generation will see their own parents, you know, mourn the loss of their essentially grandparents, you know, and wouldn't it be great if we could equip them with tools and just to know how to be there for someone in grief? Yeah.
We shelter, I don't know about you guys, we're all parents, but I think I went to my first funeral when I was 20.
Yep.
You
Yep.
know, my grandparents died when I was very young, and it was do we tell the kids, don't we tell the kids kind of thing, and it was 2 weeks down the track when we finally find out and that sort of thing. And I think that's a cultural thing as well. But then you're asking a bunch of adults, it's like it's like having your first beer when you're 20 or having anything else. You're asking someone to learn the skill that they've been hidden from them for their entire developing life. So
yeah, absolutely. And they, you know, and it's quite common to say, you know, and there's often a question asked, should the children come to the funeral? And, you know, absolutely, if you think it's the right thing. Yeah, of course, maybe don't have them view the body if you think that's going to be traumatic, but to be there for the ceremony and the collective mourning, as we talked about before, and that farewell is really important. Otherwise you will hear, you know, children saying years later, children who were old enough who could have been there, you know, say, I didn't really get to say my goodbyes. So yeah, and we're big advocates for children being part of that. It's a family mourning. It's a collective mourning. So everyone should, if they can, should be part of it.
Definitely. And I think it's something like what they say is the only thing that makes grief worse is to try and hide it or mask it, you know. And I think even in our experience when we lost Nan, like I even found myself trying to put on a brave face and just get through the day and not show my kids or not show my colleagues that, you know, inside I was like crumbling, but on the outside I was like, everything's fine, I'm good.
Yeah.
Like, it's just life's got to go on now. But, you know, I think when I got to the point of I couldn't keep that up anymore, I just let it go. I was able to move on. And I think that must be going back to Australia, who suck at dealing with death and how we handle it, particularly because men, you know, men don't cry, supposedly, you know, it's the biggest lie in the world. But I think it must be hard to, I don't know, is there stats that say it's harder for men than women based on societal pressures that we have? Like, just man up, get on with it, move on, it's life. Like, we're all going there.
I mean, I don't know of any specific stats around grief. I mean, we know in terms of mental health stats that men, you know, do struggle because they don't have the same outlets that women do to talk. I mean, I don't know about you, but I talk about everything with my friends and men. I think men are getting better though. And, you know, the gentleman on this call may be able to endorse that, but I think men are getting a lot better at talking about stuff.
Yeah. I think
anecdotally though, anecdotally, what's your people come to you, right? So anecdotally, what's the biggest population of people that actively seek help?
Yeah. It's honestly, there isn't a gender difference. We really get both men and women coming. So yeah, we don't really see any major difference. And in fact, interestingly, one anecdote I do have is that with the grief companions, often they find the people who want to talk the most are older gentlemen who've lost their, you know, wife of 60 years and 6 weeks after the funeral, and, you know, they're lonely. They're really sad, and they don't want to burden their children who've gone back to their lives and their, you know, their own things. And so they're just grateful to have somebody there to listen, and so they can, you know, they share stories of their marriage. And, you know, our grief companions say they're actually lovely calls. And it's such a privilege to be able to be there for somebody, you know, who otherwise wouldn't have anyone to talk to about that. So
someone there to tell them what to do and stop them buying things.
Yeah. Do you think oh, sorry, Chris, did you want to say something?
You're right.
Do you think just thinking back, we did a mental health workshop last week actually, and it was about you know, mental health, anxiety, suicide, and all the rest of it. And one of the best things that we can do if we suspect somebody is struggling is to not dance around the subject and not sort of beat around the bush. The best thing you can do is for somebody is actually just say, are you okay? Do you need help?
Yep.
You know what I mean? Is that the same? Would you say that's something that's helpful with grief? Like when you see somebody struggling, because I think, well, what they said in that moment for somebody that's struggling mental health or contemplating suicide, for example, the best thing you can do is hit it between the eyes, because that is so relieving for that person who actually then goes, okay, I have somebody that wants to listen. Do you think it's the same with grief? Do you think that's helpful for people, like to, you know, you sense someone's going through that? Do you think it's helpful just to say, hey, look, you know,
absolutely.
What can I do? Like, you know, because I think that's the thing. It goes back to our society, I suppose, but we know what's going on with other people, but we all shy away from it because we're like, we don't want to bring it up. We don't want to make it worse.
Yeah.
You think that's helpful?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's that safe space, as I talked about before. It's that safe space for somebody to be able to talk and have someone listen to their story, to their grief. And, you know, and again, that permission to perhaps talk about the person who's died. They call it their person. And yeah, absolutely. It's well worth it on any, I mean, grief isn't a mental illness, but it's about well-being, and it is about mental health. So yeah, it fits in the same space. Yeah.
It falls into that thing that we don't want to talk about, though. We don't want to, you know, we don't want to raise it because it's like, we don't know what's going to come from it, you know? So I think that's where it falls. But I think going back to what the lady said, who lost her daughter, she didn't have the ability to ask for help, which I totally can relate to. And I think maybe something that I'll take away from this is, yeah, you don't need to ask. You just need to do. You just need to get doing. Because
I don't know, Lou. You might need to ask, because some people, they want to do that journey alone because it is for them a privilege of that last journey with the defunct.
Yeah.
So you need to respect that. And I think that's what Katrina said earlier. We need to ask first. And I think that everyone's different. That's the same answer to Cam earlier. If you have been brought up a stoic way, telling someone to sit in a room and cry, it may work. But if you're not, and you've been brought up to be highly sensitive and always, but getting them in the room, it's wrong. That would be like asking a Formula One now to do four-wheel driving for 3 months, and it's going to get into the action. It doesn't work. You need, if you're going to really give someone support, you have to first understand how does that person work?
Yes.
Because me, with my grief, I rejoice in doing it alone, because it is almost a privilege for me now to say goodbye in my own way, alone, one-on-one. And so I have many friends asking me, and I feel like, no, you're not gonna steal that last journey with that person from me. It is, and so don't jump in and do it, because you may find that person will just tell you to piss off.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
And that comes back to those words, safe space. You know, for you, Thomas, that's your safe space is you in there on your grief journey. You know your friends are there if you need them because they've told you, but you don't want them in that space. But for others, you know, they do want to walk alongside somebody in that space. So yeah, it's that individual nature.
Let me ask you something a bit tougher. You don't have to answer that one, all right? Soul, does it exist? Doesn't it exist?
The soul. Oh, that's a real personal thing, but it does come up, you know, as a team, and we talk about death and grief, and we actually had a webinar recently about spirituality and death, and honestly, I mean, everybody has their own beliefs. It really comes down to that. I kind of think we do, but that's just a real personal thing for me. But it's a really interesting conversation starter at a dinner party if you need it.
Because the reason I'm asking that, I have friends who have lost a loved one, and 20 years down the road, they still in the same pain, same place, same anger, same everything as if it was the first day. But I'm just thinking, and they believe that the spirit of their child is still around. I'm thinking, hold on, if the spirit of your child is around, how can you be sad? If the soul is still around, shouldn't you then enjoy that soul and the spirit? And every single day that you wake up, shouldn't you be in communion with that person, you know, or that soul?
Isn't that you judging how they're doing it?
No, I'm asking, if you believe in that existence, then shouldn't that should that mean that that person is still around you, that when you're having breakfast, actually that person's there?
Well, I think it depends on what you mean by, believing the soul is still there, because, a lot of people still talk to their dead loved one, and they, someone said recently said, I still go out to coffee with them. And it's not that they sit there and order a coffee for the other person and pretend that they're there, but they just kind of do things and they feel a presence, or they like to believe that, for them that person is still there in spirit, I suppose you could say, and hence the soul aspect. Versus tangibly believing that the spirit is there. Again, it's a really personal thing. Yeah.
But because you've seen way more than me, and with the Grief Center, you guys probably have got the thesaurus of all of these things. I thought might as well risk that question.
Yeah, it's a good question.
So what would you say now to people who are stuck in a prolonged grief? How do they move on?
Move forward, not move on.
Move forward. Sorry, you said move forward.
Yeah, well, I guess as I said before, just that sometimes just thinking about your grief, that it doesn't have to be a barrier to you in your life. It's okay to still acknowledge that grief, it will always be with you. That person will always be with you. That person is, if it was your father, if it was your daughter, they still were your father, they still were your daughter. It's okay to acknowledge that, to take your grief, put it somewhere, hold it with you and move forward. Don't let it get in your way. But I think if you're really, really struggling, then talking to a professional who can help you perhaps understand why you can't move forward, because there may be underlying triggers or underlying things that are stopping you from moving forward.
Because Chris and I, we spoke about it not so long ago. It's one thing to lose a father or mother, but if you lose a child,
it's
how do you tell that person? I mean, and that's the story of that person. How do you tell that person really to move on or move forward?
You can't tell them to. They eventually will. That's the reality. Your life grows around the grief, and you learn to move forward with it. I did a presentation to some funeral directors last month, and we were talking about this concept of the person will always still be part of your life. And she said she had a woman who'd lost her only child, and she asked the question, am I still a mother? And I mean, it's a heartbreaking question, but the reality is, yes, you are still a mother. Your daughter is no longer physically around, but you are still a mother. I mean, that sort of loss is hugely traumatic and hugely hard, and generally I would have thought would require some professional support to get through. And unfortunately the reality is your life will never be the same. It's changed. It doesn't mean it has to be awful. It doesn't mean you have to sit in the grief forever, but you will have always lost a child.
I can't even think about that. That's just too much to even think about.
It's been, I mean, it's a great discussion. Really, you've been opening a lot of eyes here, but I've just wished that your center could really do a lot of things with schools. I mean, I lost my father a few weeks ago.
Yes, and I'm sorry.
And almost none of my children spoke about it.
Really?
Yes, and so they were sorry for they said a few things, and they had their own text at the funeral that was sent overseas. But as I flew back in beside my daughter, who's asked me a few times, "How are you going? Are you okay?" Really, the other children, it's almost like being a silent thing. It's almost like maybe they understood that leave him alone. But I don't know. Is it because it's they know me, or is it because really they haven't been taught at school? Just like probably 30 or 40 years ago, talking about sex with your parents, it was like, what are you talking about? You'll find out on your wedding night, but almost now it's almost like you'll find out about grief when you lose the parent.
Yeah, and it's true. It's that we're not really prepped for it. The first preparation comes when we actually lose someone we love, close to us. So you're absolutely right. There is more that can be done in education. I think it's breaking down that barrier that people don't want to talk about death or grief. I mean, we're really comfortable talking about it at the centre because we see it every day, and you'll go out and sometimes you'll forget that not everybody's really comfortable talking about death. because we're not. And so I think, yeah, you're getting into education and at least starting the conversation and talking around it, I think is really, really important.
Like skipping this entire subject, unless you guys have got other questions around the subject. What about what you're doing and skipping into a parallel world? What about someone who's been working up until 2020 for 30 years in a job and then lost their job because of COVID?
Yep.
Is it the same phenomenon of grief that they go through, and how different is that? And how, where can they get help from Grief Center? Because it feels to me like you're in a very niche market.
No, and that's the thing. You know, people naturally think of grief as being for death related. It's a bereavement, but actually, you know, a lot of loss that we work with is not death related. Sure, the majority would be death related, but absolutely, it's people being made redundant. Pet loss is actually a huge thing right now. There are counsellors who literally just do pet loss counselling.
Pet loss.
Pet loss, yeah, because you know, pets are a huge part of the family, and for a lot of people, or a number of people these days, they're like their children, that we fur babies, and so when losing a pet is hugely traumatic. So we counsel in that space. Actually, in the aged older person's aged care area is massive, because you're dealing with particularly dementia. Is a new loss that not only for the person who has dementia, and often we can counsel people who are in the early stages to learn to deal with what they're going to go through, and then secondly, obviously the partner or family who are losing the loved one to dementia. They're not dying; it's a non-death loss, but essentially they're losing that person. So, and even in that space, you know, an older person even moving out of their home, having to go to a retirement village, it's a loss and a grief in itself. Losing faculty. So my mother has just gone blind. You know, so she grieves the loss of her sight. Yeah, so there's a lot of loss which is non-death related, and certainly we support people through all of that, because it's a grief. It's a loss and it's a grief.
Is it a real, I mean, I suppose just listening to what you said, then it is, but like grieving somebody who's still alive, you know, they may have a drug dependent child, a drug dependent parent, and you're watching them just fade away, and you, it's like what they say about dementia, it's the longest goodbye. I suppose in that same respect, somebody going through that, it's the same thing, you know, and it is. Do they still consider that like grief? I suppose it is. Is it you're watching them fade away? You're watching them just waste.
Well, Chris lost his dad. No, yeah.
You know, I'll speak from experience in this one. So, when my mother passed, it wasn't quick, but it was a slow demise. But she had all faculties, so she could converse, and it was. So when my father got dementia, very shortly after. It was two goodbyes, and it was a change in our relationship from when he was like all there to the fun and times we had when he had dementia, because it was a little bit fun and it was a little bit strange. And then when he finally passed, the grief was different to when my mum passed, because we'd already sort of grieved the loss of my father as we knew him.
Yeah.
And when that change from when he got dementia to when he passed was only, I think, about 2 years, maybe 3. So it was a different grief. And it was only recently that I realized it, that I actually grieved twice.
It's so, yeah, it's a similar thing, Chris, like what I'm experiencing with my pop now. Like it's been 2 years since Nan died, and he's gone completely downhill since Nan died. He barely recognizes anybody anymore. He doesn't know really what's going on, but he still walks around to this day. He even had the hospital ring up the other day back home and ask for Margaret, which was my Nan. Yet he doesn't know who anyone else is, but he still remembers my Nan. And it's like, I just want to go to Margaret. And it's like, he knows enough to know that, but he doesn't know his own name.
You know, Lou, I'm going to give you a bit of advice on that. And it's never okay to lie, except in that circumstance. Just say she's not with us at the moment, she's busy or whatever it is. I went through the same thing with my dad and my mum. his brother. So
Yeah.
Sir Thomas's point though, so you asked about job loss and stuff. It's obviously on the surface a lot less sentimental and a lot less close to home. But are the physiological responses the same? Is the grief response the same? Just like, so fight or flight is a response, right? And that'll get triggered. Because for as complex as us human beings are, in a lot of ways, we're rather simple, right? We're either fight or flight in a lot of situations. So
Yeah.
is we talk about COVID when the government killed those poor restaurateurs and all those people. Is that sort of grief response physiologically the same as losing a loved one? Are the effects the same? Well, we know, Jesus, we know the effects of people losing their business in regards to suicide and the rest of that type of thing. So do you see a similar, basically, are the physiological responses the same?
Oh, look, I don't want to, not being a counsellor, I don't necessarily want to say yay or nay to that. I mean, I can imagine that they would be. Just talking about other non-death losses, I did find some interesting research from McKinsey done in 2021, and it stemmed from COVID, but it talked about we often talk about the emotional and physical well-being impacts of grief. But it actually talked about the economic impact of grief, and they did a study in the US, and this is unresolved grief. This is people that are struggling with grief and they're in the workplace, and they estimated that it costs the US economy about $75 billion a year of unresolved grief, and that wasn't just non-death grief. That was grief related to even just not getting promotions or being demoted or those sorts of things. So I thought it was a really interesting statistic. But absolutely physically, sure. I mean, because those sort of situations are stressful as well. And whilst death loss is stressful too, losing your job is incredibly stressful. So you're going to see a physical response to that.
A lot of the advice runs parallel, right? So you lose someone, ask for help or don't ask for help, and you're going to deal with it the same way. On the other side, it's be there for someone, but don't be too intrusive, but make sure you're there for someone. Like it all, the conversation we're having keeps going back to loss of life, right? But we also have Are You OK Day, which is all about, there's nothing to do with loss of life. It's about preventing loss of life, right?
Yeah.
So
it's an
anecdotally, it appears that the grief is grief.
An interesting stat that came out of the workshop that we did last week was that the leading cause of death of men between 30 and 45 is suicide now. That's the leading cause of death. And they said one of the biggest triggers of that was the loss, not necessarily of somebody that's alive, of losing their children in a custody battle or something like that. So they said it's in the top, it's the top of the top three reasons for men's suicide. And that is the leading cause of death in men in Australia today between 30 and 45 is suicide. And the number one trigger is loss, not of somebody alive, but loss of the not having their children anymore, So does it affect us the same as losing somebody alive, or perhaps even sometimes worse, knowing that they are alive and can't get to them? That's, I don't know.
Helplessness.
Yeah.
Exactly, Chris. Exactly.
Yep.
So the Latin meaning for grief is heaviness, right? Is to carry something, is heaviness. So the loss of anything, whether it's a partner, a child through a divorce case, and I don't know, a pet, maybe I don't even know, a loss of a grand final. Cam would know that, but anything that's sort of heavy, it's a weight you've got to carry, right?
Yeah.
Yep, it is indeed. And I on that, I asked the funeral directors at this training I was doing, I got them to do a little bit of a metaphor, simile kind of exercise as to what grief was. And one of them said, grief is your older brother sitting on your chest and refusing to get off. And I think, I really liked that. metaphor, because it's the weight, right? It's there, it's pressing down, it's crushing you.
Yeah. One of the things that I read was grief can also be our greatest teacher. It teaches perspective, it teaches patience, it teaches love,
Wisdom.
It teaches so much. And they say that you wouldn't wish your sadness on your worst enemy, but you would wish your perspective on the entire world of what it does to you,
This is so nice. Do you know what, Katrina? Thank you so much for joining us for this hour.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me.
And I think that you've done a lot for a lot of people, and a lot of people who are going to listen to this in the car too. So what would be your number one advice now to people who are grieving from your experience and Grief Center, and maybe for people who want to go on and have a look, it's griefcenter.com.au.
That's correct. Yep.
And so what would be your biggest advice?
Well, I think just to say there is no right or wrong way to grieve. There is no process. There are no stages you have to follow. Grief is really individual, and acknowledging that and being kind to yourself, and I think looking after yourself as well. The simple things, making sure you're eating and sleeping as well as you can, getting out for some exercise, those self-care tips are really important in grief. And and your grief is valid. Your journey is yours, and you will move forward.
Okay. And on a funny note, is there a hotline for South Africans when they're going to lose the World Cup on Saturday?
Absolutely, it's a good idea. We should set one up. It's going to be a lot of grief there. I'm assuming
you lost.
Yeah, I'm assuming you've got over your grief already. Have you moved forward?
We're a rugby league nation, mate. We don't.
I know. Oh, yeah, that's what you always say when you're not.
See you on Saturday. Well, I think we play the Kiwis on Saturday in the real game.
Oh, okay.
Katrina, thank you so much. Team, great session. Thank you. Katrina, you made this podcast very normal this time. Thank you so much for this.
Good.
Thanks,
Thank you
Katrina.
so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.